Rob, thank you for being here.
Of course. Thanks for having me on the pod. It's exciting.
So, briefly explain what computer vision is and why it's important.
Yeah. So I posed the same fundamental question to everyone I interviewed for my book. That's basically the question my book is hoping to answer. People at MIT's computer science lab, a product manager at Adobe, people in think tanks, and they all say pretty much the same thing. Computer vision is giving computers the ability to see and often to interact with objects around them through some visual sensor. Maybe it's a normal visual light camera, maybe it's infrared, maybe it's X-rays, just any visual information, going from like, oh, this is a block of orange pixels to, oh, this is a traffic cone. I need to not hit that. I need to stop the autonomous vehicle. Or, this is a benign or a cancerous tumor, and, the patient should know that. So yeah, it's a more advanced pattern recognition system than we've had in the past. And it's important today because you might be familiar with concepts like face recognition, self-driving cars, autonomous cars, automated license plate readers, augmented reality. This all falls under the umbrella of computer vision. These are things that we think of as separate systems, but they're all kind of fueled by computer vision. Uh, Even in Hollywood sporting, you've got like ball trackers, player pose estimators, audience facial reaction evaluators, all this stuff. Even just unlocking your phone with your face is part of computer vision.
So,
It's a
what's the
big deal.
difference between computer vision, sorry to interrupt you, between computer vision and artificial intelligence? Because we brought up autonomous vehicles, we brought up facial recognition. So, just for the average Gen Zer, how do we someone distinguish between computer vision and artificial intelligence?
Sure. So I come from the world of filmmaking. I
Mhm.
worked in film production for more than a decade, so my brain is like mostly concerned with images and video codecs and this and that. Computer vision is just the subset of AI dealing particularly with image, data extraction, and lately image data generation, right? Going from text back to images in the form of like a generative model or a diffusion model. Uh, Computer vision does not include things like natural language processing, being able to like classify documents. Like ChatGPT is not computer vision because it's just text based.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
Things like you know quantitative regression analysis. Like if you're just trying to predict like stock prices, like that could be AI powered, but it doesn't have necessarily to. It probably doesn't have to do with computer vision. So computer vision just strictly the things within AI that concern themselves with visual data and interacting with the world through that visual data. Like we use our eyes. Computers can kind of have eyes now as well.
For sure. So you wrote a book about computer vision and its effects on society, which we will start picking apart very soon. And so initially, what's the most difficult part about writing a book about any particular technology's effects on society?
Yeah, it's challenging as an author to kind of get your bearings and say like which parts of this matter right now, which
For sure.
parts of this are kind of fundamental and like we have to talk about this to get it out of the way, and which parts are going to expire in the next like few months. It's such a fast moving target.
Mhm.
Writing about technology, you never know what's going to happen in the news tomorrow. That's going to just turn everything on its head. That was the
Yeah.
biggest challenge for me. It was like I get into the revisions process, which is often like the longest part of writing a book, is just revising, editing. And there's headlines popping up left and right. And it's like, oh, this needs to go in the book, but we're editing now. It's like we're frozen in a moment in time.
Mm.
We got to just embrace that this is like going to be sort of a snapshot of a moment in time. And
Right.
we'll see how it plays out. You've probably read old books and thought, like from whatever 50 years ago, and thought like, oh, this is cute. They thought that's how it was going to go. So hopefully my
100%.
predictions and projections hold up. But yeah, it's challenging when it's such a fast moving target.
And what was your writing process like?
Yeah, I was lucky to have resources like a writing community and a developmental editor. So I started with just a lot of research, just a lot of reading and getting familiar with sort of the characters in this space. Who are the primary journalists on the beat? Who are the researchers kind of at the tip of the spear? Who are the people in the technology industry at the sort of tech giants, like pushing the envelope on the research? Uh, and how has that been affecting people, right? Who's on the butt end of some of this stuff, like not necessarily the good side, people who are adversely affected by the
Mhm.
proliferation of technologies, for better for worse.
So,
So yeah, a lot of interviews just like this, like you and I having a conversation, me calling up someone and saying like, hey, I want to write a book about the thing that you're an expert in. You have 20, 30 minutes, and people always seem to want to talk to you when you want to write a book about the thing that they're excited about. So
which is good
yeah.
to hear.
Yeah, like if you want to meet a lot of really notable people in your field, just write a book about it, and it'll open all kinds of doors. People
For sure.
will really pick up the phone.
So I had a question, which was, why did you write a book instead of doing like a podcast series or doing like a lecture series? And it's something that I had to think about as well when I was writing my book, which is, are people still going to process the information in the same way? Do people even have the attention span for such a dense, intricate topic? So, what was your philosophy or mindset around writing a book specifically?
Yeah, I think on the other side of the spectrum, like you could write volumes about this stuff. I had just read like a very long, dense book about, the birth of the internet and like the birth of digital computing. And, it kept me busy for like months just
Yeah.
pouring through this thing. So like I nerd out, I geek out about this stuff. So like it made sense to me to distill a lot of what I was seeing across different news outlets and distill what I was seeing, in real life into something compact. Like my book is not terribly long. It's people have crushed it in like 2 days. It's a skinny one, so at least there's that. But you know, I love that we're getting to talk about it in podcast format now and share some of the more kind of core insights in this format, which is more condensed and like we don't get to go into the weeds as much, but we're gonna get to the core message. So I like that.
Okay, so let's get into the core message. Starting with something that is of very um, important concern, which is automation. So we talked about autonomous vehicles earlier in the conversation. A lot of people think that autonomous vehicles are going to, heavily disrupt, um, taxi drivers, truck drivers. Is automation a concern to you, and should it be for Gen Z?
Certainly, yes, and yes. I think I am concerned with automation. I'm concerned about it. Gen Z should be concerned about it. It's going to keep happening. It's not all bad, but we need to be more careful with it because we've seen what happens with like Uber ride sharing companies. What did they automate? They automated dispatching. They automated the job of taxi dispatcher, right? Like the driving is still done by humans, but no one is sitting in a call center like getting calls from passengers like, hey, I want to get picked up. So what happens now? There's only a small handful of taxi dispatchers, and they mostly just do fancy limousine services. And it's very hard to find work as a taxi dispatcher. That's just something that automation and AI have totally like kind of taken out of the job economy, for better or for worse. And it's better because now we have these convenient services where we can call cars with our phones. It's worse because it popped the bubble on the price of a taxi cab medallion, for example. And now drivers don't get the representation necessarily that they deserve, right? As workers. Um, a lot of people spent a lot of money, like close to $1 million to buy a taxi medallion. And then Uber and Lyft came along, value of the medallion went down to like 200,000. People were taking out loans to buy these things. So like vulnerable populations, people from other countries trying to live the American dream. So it's hard to predict what the second order side effects are going to be when you present solutions like ride sharing through a phone. It's like, oh yeah, it's convenient for a lot of people. lower cost, but who's it going to affect? Uh, I personally enjoy, the automations that computer vision has brought on. Like I like to identify, trees and flowers and birds and stuff with my phone camera, and that's pretty benign. But I'm in a position of privilege probably where other people like won't get to they'll experience more of the negative side effects of automation. So uh, you have to watch out for that.
So, can you speak to some of the benefits of automation in regards to computer vision?
Absolutely. So benefits automation. So computer vision is causing a sort of revolution in healthcare, in radiology, for example, in the clinic. So our healthcare system is pretty broken. Like healthcare workers are largely overworked and understaffed and underfunded. So really anything to help them out is very clutch. So systems like automated classification of radiological images, if you can build an algorithm, which we have, that's more accurate than a panel of 23 radiologists and deploy it at scale, that's positive. I've got some notes here on, say, um, so I have this quote from my book. I wrote that an image-based FDA-approved algorithm called Deep Ventricle enables rapid analysis of the heart's blood flow, reducing a task that can take an hour as blood is drawn and measured by hand to a 15-second scan. So that's 200 times faster than what they've been doing before.
Hmm.
Like every time, if it works with a high degree of accuracy, if we subject it to the same level of rigor as we would any manual process, and we'll talk about that,
Sure.
then I'm for it. I'm like, yeah, if it does it 200 times faster and it's just as good or better, let's run it. Let's save that doctor time so they can spend more time just face to face with me, with you, like talking to your face about your health and like, engaging in that sort of clinical empathetic dialogue that we find so valuable as it's like bringing the humanity back to healthcare. So there are applications like those. And on the flip side, it's like they have to be good. They can't, you can't, you know, like pacemakers are subjected to a higher level of scrutiny than like iPhones for a reason, right? You don't want to put out an algorithm that's going to screw up 2% of the time because that 2% could mean thousands of people die because there's too much glucose in their bloodstream now or something. So those are things to keep in mind. And I was bullish on self-driving when I published the book, probably more than I am now. I think American roads will be safer when most of the drivers are computers, algorithms. They're going to put themselves in less risky scenarios. I couldn't have seen what was coming down the pipes, which was that like with this kind of initial foray into self-driving in cities like San Francisco, there's a big clash between human driving style and AI driving style. And the AI driven cars are getting in very weird, awkward scenarios and
Hmm.
causing problems for emergency responders. So I'm kind of back on the side of like, let's just get rid of all the cars.
No, I'm
Self-driving was a cool
100%
idea,
with
but
you. I'm
let's just
100% with
like
you.
boost mass transit and maybe AI driven trucks for cross country shipments if that infrastructure is still going to be around anyway. Um, that's just where I'm at.
So, speaking
Um,
to this awkward transition between self-driving cars on the roads and human drivers, do you think that we can extrapolate this gray area onto other sectors? Like we were talking about healthcare. Uh, are we going to automate certain systems that then have certain jobs still run by humans and encounter these awkward scenarios where humans and AI systems slash robots start clashing?
that's an interesting question. I think if we go back to like the healthcare domain, we found that actually the most accurate is when you combine a high precision, you know, image-based classifier with a radiologist who knows what they're doing
Mhm.
so they can collaborate and come to a better conclusion than just one or the other. The best results come from that fusion of like human intuition and algorithmic, data analysis just by the numbers. You get a better result every time when you let them collaborate. So I'm hopeful that more of that kind of thing crops up. In law enforcement, certainly, there's a lot of friction around what police officers, other law enforcement officials can or can't do with image data as far as de-identifying people, or sorry, identifying people in security camera footage. People should be blurred by default, is my opinion, right? Like people should have a reasonable expectation of privacy as they go about their daily lives. And the more we give the algorithm, the ability to sort of police our population, it can be good and bad, right? Like,
We'll definitely get to the ramifications of facial recognition systems on the streets, this or these Orwellian nightmares. I just wanted to ask you, there in Human Compatible, there were, I believe it was Human Compatible by Stuart Russell, there were talks of um, AI systems and humans being able to cooperate in playing chess. And it was at the time, you know, people believed that AI systems and humans worked better than just one or the other in, playing chess and beating other AI human teams. But what ended up happening was that AI just became much better than humans at chess, even better than the AI human teams. So and I realize that time is slightly arbitrary when it comes to technologies like artificial intelligence and computer vision. But when do you think that artificial intelligence slash computer vision will completely overtake humans at any particular role? And how should we start planning for this future when a human doesn't necessarily need to assist a computer or an AI in anything? The AI can just handle it themselves. Am I being clear in the question?
yeah, it's a little open-ended, but that's okay.
Sure.
Uh, so yeah, we've had these different kind of milestones of like things that we consider to be cognitively challenging. Like, oh, okay, now the computer is better at chess than the human is, like any human. We threw our best human at it, and the AI still beats him. And then we got to Go, right? We got AlphaGo, and it's better than the world champion Go player, even more cognitively challenging. Still very narrow though. That's the thing I think people don't understand about AI in general and also computer vision is we're training these algorithms to be very narrow as far as their applications. Like, and they work best in very controlled environments. Like, it's not like the hunt for general AI. It's not like a super intelligence like in the style of the movie Her, the Spike Jonze movie Her, where it's like Scarlett Johansson is like the disembodied AI voice. Like that's for a later date. Right now, we're talking about like maybe we shouldn't put so many images of women in the kitchen in our training data set because then the computer is going to think it's still a woman even though it's a man because he's wearing like an apron and
Mm.
he's got like a chef hat and he's like in his residential kitchen. Like that's just biased because we have an imbalanced data set. Like this is a thing that's supposed to classify images like man, woman, spatula, chef's hat, and it's like doing it wrong because we didn't build our data set correctly.
Right.
So every day, computer vision is getting better than humans at something, right? Maybe it's like inspecting glass vials moving down a conveyor belt, right? Like inspecting for little cracks so that we don't send out medicine that's defective. Um, Computer vision is getting better at, yeah, like classifying radiological scans. Uh, just getting better at even maybe assembling things on a conveyor belt, like looking at objects on a conveyor belt, picking them up, and being like, they go together. Um, some of these are jobs that people might still want, right? Like, because everyone needs a job, and in this capitalist society, it's like we got to do something for work.
Hmm.
But in the 1800s, it was like textile work, right? We don't want machines doing the textile work because we do it better, so we're going to put rocks in the machines like the
Sure.
Luddites were very anti-automation because it was going to take their jobs, and they weren't being fair about it. They were just like kind of pushing it in without asking, like, are we getting the same quality product? Are we getting the same working conditions? No, it was like challenging working conditions and like uh, inferior product. So sorry, went
Right.
on a bit of a tangent there.
No, that's
Help me
okay.
refocus.
I was going to ask you, since we touched on it, what are your thoughts about general intelligence?
I don't think about it too much, honestly.
No?
Like I've had my head stuck in the present and the
Sure.
near future, like the next 5 to 15 years. But I think general intelligence, people are starting to wonder if we're like scraping at it a little bit with stuff like Chat GPT with the large language models. I'm not so convinced. I think like it's all still just these very niche applications,
Yeah.
and like I I have to ask, like, what does it feel like to be Chat GPT? You know, like, does it feel more like being me, or does it feel more like being, my computer mouse? Like,
Hmm.
does it feel more like being a table? I don't know. It's
Very
hard to say.
Hegelian.
Is that their line of thinking? Yeah.
Like Thomas Nagel ascribes consciousness if there is exists something that is like that thing. So if there is something to be like a bat, then a bat by default is conscious. So you were saying that if there's something that is like being Chat GPT, then Chat GPT must have some inkling of consciousness.
Yeah, I would align with that. So now I know where I was borrowing that from.
Yeah,
Thanks.
for sure. No, I 100% agree. I think it's irresponsible to label ChatGPT and similar LLMs as generally intelligent and even going a step further and saying that they're conscious. I don't understand it. Anyway, let's press onwards. So, what are the ethical implications to using computer vision around society similar to the Orwellian nightmares?
Yeah. So you have two sides of the point, right? The one side is if we don't use this, we're not doing everything in our power to like stop the bad guys, cure all the diseases and automate all the boring stuff that, people are getting hurt doing all this repetitive, boring work. Let's automate that. Um, the other side of the coin is with, every automation, every technological advancement, there's some second order side effect. There are some really blatant evil use cases for computer vision. Like you can be kind of genocidal with it. Like we can unlock our phones with our faces now, right? We like that. It's convenient. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But what if you could pay for your bus fare or your train fare with your face? Like, what if you could just walk on? There's a camera, and it's like, boom, that's Rob. He's paying, uh, and it's seamless. It's like very convenient. So, what's the price of that convenience? In 2021, this Russian journalist gets on the Moscow metro to go cover an anti-Kremlin rally, and they grab him before he gets to the protests because they scraped a photo from his social media profile that's in their database. They don't even need him to opt into the program. It's just like the society is equipped to do facial recognition and watch out for people who might bring down the sort of oppressive leadership. So you can pen yourself into a surveillance state by accepting these technologies. In China, you have a specific racial minority. The Uyghur population is sort of held captive in a surveillance state where it's gotten really bad. Like the police are walking around with like prototype kind of Google Glass looking augmented reality glasses to better identify people and say like, ah, this person has like low social credit. Like they've tried to escape, and we're gonna like keep an extra close watch on them. Uh, so facial recognition can be incredibly harmful to a free society if you let it go unfettered, like unregulated. Uh, it can give you over policing. It can work much worse on people of color. Like if you have an image data set that's primarily like Anglo-centric, it's going to get people's identities wrong when they are of darker complexion. And we've had more and more cases of that in the United States. people getting pulled out of their homes at dinner time because they look like someone from a security camera feed who like robbed a store
Right.
2 hours ago. And it's like, does this look like me? This is not me. Like, what am I doing in this brightly lit like interrogation room? Put me back with my family, please. Like, this could have gone so much worse, and I'm scared. Like, that's so not the society I want to live in. Is one where like police can just use this technology without checks and balances. Um, yeah.
But Rob, the problem is that we don't have a choice. Because if the city just decides to implement a bunch of cameras on any particular street that utilize facial recognition technology, even if they are not acting in any uh, privacy enhancing or correct way, it's still going to affect us. And so, is the answer that people who don't want to live in that city just move? What happens if every city has these cameras? So, how do we deal with this increasing move to lower our amounts of privacy on the premise of increasing our safety? How do we manage that transition and how should we think about it?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like there's a sort of defeatist angle where it's like, well, it's here to stay and we can't do anything about it. But I would counter that, the city is just the people in that city, and presuming that it is like a democratic society, like I live in New York City, and we're starting to see policies here where it's like if your store is going to have biometric scanners when you walk in, you need to have signs that say like, "Hey, we're
Mm,
collecting your biometric data."
right.
It needs to be like loud and visible and right where people can see it, so that they know when they walk into Whole Foods that their face is going into some database, of like potential shoplifters or whatever, like high value customers or whatever they're using it for. So that's interesting. I think, yeah, civic engagement is going to be key. Like our leaders need to be tuned into this stuff, reading my book, and
Yes.
like, and be like up to speed on the ramifications that face recognition in an urban environment is going to have, because their voters are going to depend on them for like making good, sensible policy decisions. And I hope someday people get voted out because they don't care, or
Mhm.
people get voted out because they put profits over people's privacy. And that's, I think, where the power comes. Is like our ability to select leaders who have our best interests at heart and understand, don't minimize that role it plays in our day to day.
So, a handful of months ago, a letter was sent around by a lot of high profile individuals, signed by a lot of high profile individuals to regulate artificial intelligence or to halt it for the next 6 months or a year or whichever arbitrary number they picked. Should the same thing happen with computer vision? Why or why not?
Yeah, it's tricky because in something like genetics, right, where you have gene editing, there's like a global moratorium right now on, um, you know, making like designer babies because we don't know what the downstream effects can be. And that's easier to regulate because not everyone has like gene sequencing and gene editing technology like sitting on their desk. On the other hand, you and I have devices on our desks right now. We're talking through them that can build computer vision systems, and they're just commercially available. They're widespread. They're everywhere. Do I think there needs to be like a hard stop on all face recognition and all self-driving? I don't think so. No, I think that would be too simplistic. No, I don't know that you could even pull that off, right? It would be impossible to just put a hard stop on software research. It'd be very challenging to enforce, and
Mhm.
people are just going to do it anyway. But when it comes to bureaucratic systems, then we can have checks and balances, right? Like we can make it so that a cop has to get a search warrant to de-anonymize footage from a video feed and say like, ah, yes, like this was a situation where we needed to know who that was. It's not just I want to know where my ex-wife is hanging out. Like
Mm.
it's like we can implement policies. We have to implement policies for our own safety that limit, you know, uh, government use of these technologies to protect ourselves and our democracy. Yeah, I think regulation has its place. Like if we let everybody who wanted to just put a self-driving car on the road, we'd have a lot more carnage and destruction because that's a lot of metal. It's just like a very big, heavy object to be putting out in public space. So there should be probably more oversight into how we're deploying autonomous vehicles, how we're, the range, the hours. Like this is something people need to have more of a voice in than they do right now. Even like Tesla's autopilot feature, the fact that it's marketed as autopilot and it's still not more than like a level 3 system where you're
Mm.
supposed to be like alert all the time. So many people have put too much faith in that system already, and to ruinous effect. So there probably should be more regulation around how these things are marketed, even.
Mm. I agree. S- It, I think the regulation and the implementation of these systems um, is up to Gen Z fundamentally. It'll be up to Gen Z and Gen Alpha. So if any particular Gen Z, maybe in high school or right about to enter university or college, or maybe they're in university or college, how would you recommend they begin their computer vision career? What sort of things would you recommend they learn? What was your background and how did you get into this space? I know you said you were a filmmaker.
Yeah. So I got into the space because so much of what I was doing felt like it could be automated. I had this
Mm.
sort of spidey sense of like, I'm doing the same thing over and over again. I'm using my eyes. I'm like finding the thing on the screen and, you know, creating like data basically. And it's like, I know that there's something happening in the AI world where they're training algorithms to do similar things. So what's to say that my job's not going to get automated in the next like 5 or 10 years? So
Can I stop you right there and just ask, how did you acquire that prescience? Because that is something that a lot more Gen Z need, but it doesn't feel like they are getting it without a lot of external input. Um, so
really,
where did that understanding come from?
I think if you're getting bored at work, like if you have a job to do and it feels like you're not engaged, like you could be doing something greater with
Mhm.
your brain and your time, then maybe what you're doing is automatable, or it could be in the next few years.
Sure.
Um, that was part of what made me feel like I needed to switch up my career, certainly. Um, yeah, hmm. I would caution Gen Z to know what they're getting into when you upload your face print to public websites. Like we think of places like LinkedIn, whatever now, like Threads, as like they're sort of these gated communities, but like they're totally public, and there are billions of images of people's faces like in a database because these websites are just very scrapable. Like it's very easy to collect image data from these websites, tie them to the username, and like depending on how much or how little you value your privacy, just know what you're getting into when you
Well, can
upload
you,
something that's your face, the geometry of your face, like how like the position of different anchor points. It's a unique identifier, just like your fingerprint.
right.
And if it's tied to your name and it's on the internet, then you just lose that little bit of anonymity in the world because someone somewhere could put you in their facial recognition database and they have the cartography of your face mapped out, and like yeah, your expectation of privacy is just lower that way, like from a purely game theory kind of perspective. It's like
But see, from a Gen Z point of view, I'm 22. I don't care. It makes no difference to me. So, from your perspective, what why should I care that someone, in India or South Africa has my unique identifier of face and name combination in their database and has used that for their facial recognition system? Like, why is that relevant or important for me to understand and to be wary of?
Yeah, I suppose it harkens back to the law enforcement question. I guess it's less about someone random in India and more
Sure.
about like my local government. Like
Sure.
when I leave my apartment and walk around and spend time in the world I live in, I don't want there to be little breadcrumbs of data for like Google even to use to like better advertise to me necessarily. If you are someone who is annoyed by being a product, then you can, there are ways to protect that. Like you can just use pseudonyms on the internet and upload, your favorite anime character instead of your own face, and just be more mysterious to everyone. But I think like you got to watch out for AI snake oil as well. Like
Mhm.
there are lots of products. This is something like more actionable, I think. It's like there are companies out there who claim to be able to use computer vision. They say like, "Oh, you're hiring. You're in charge of hiring for your startup. Here's a technology where job candidates can upload like a 15-second video, 30-second video, whatever, and we'll score them. We're going to rank them on like different axes like adventurousness, empathy, intelligence, like stuff that I would not be able to get from a 15 or 30-second conversation with someone. Because that's like trying to put your whole human, experience into like a simple whatever, like emotion classification algorithm. That's not how hiring should work. So I would caution Gen Z to be skeptical of systems that claim to be able to do a lot more than a human could.
Mhm.
We have good intuition. Like if I can't peg you as a good or bad job candidate in 15 to 30 seconds, then computer vision algorithm can't do it either, even though it can make some kind of decision like in 1 second.
Sure.
Like faster doesn't necessarily mean more accurate.
We talked about ChatGPT earlier, and when we're thinking about ChatGPT and Bard and other large language models in the context of Generation Z, it feels like this particular group has latched on to these technologies and used them to create art and to write essays for them, to finish their homework. So, just in the context of art, what are the ethical ramifications of using AI art? Um, how should we be thinking about it, and what are the problems with this?
Yeah, I had the pleasure of attending Gen Con this year, which was like a big board game conference in Indianapolis this year. There was a panel on the ethics of AI visual art, and it seemed like the primary concerns were about attribution, right? Like to train a huge text to image model, you need tons of image data. A lot of that is going to be garbage. A lot of it is going to be from living, working artists who are trying to make a living today. Uh, so the problem is not in like the ability to create cool new art by typing into a box. It's more like if I can type, give me a super cool, comic book style thing in the style of this living artist who is trying to make rent. um, it's kind of a copyright question, right? And it hasn't fully shaken out in court yet. Like we have not landed on where we stand on that through legal precedents yet. Like so, basically, maybe don't try to monetize this stuff because you might have to take it down later. Like
Hmm.
because we don't know how the copyright lawsuits are going to shake out. Um, when you make visual art with AI, when you use computer vision in a generative sense, no one's made the perfect, like unbiased, fully consensual image data set yet. Like it's all kind of non-consensual scraping and like just all of DeviantArt is going to be thrown into this model. And now like every artist on DeviantArt is like a little bit less paid because people are going to use, Midjourney instead of Fiverr for something.
So, what's the difference between these open source tools utilizing public and private data and then private companies' algorithms like YouTube and Instagram using public and private data? Like, what is the difference here? It's just one is that we're able to access the algorithm, and the other is that only the company and the users are able to. So, like, how should we be thinking of this, or is there disparity in this, or like, what's the problem then?
Yeah, I think the primary issue is consent. It's like when I make an Instagram account, I have to push like agree to the terms and conditions, and
Which
it
no one
says, yeah,
reads.
every time. No one reads it, but
Yeah,
they agree
yeah,
anyway. And
sure.
so now when you're uploading your art to Instagram,
Yep,
now it's Zuckerberg's art. Um, the same is not true of these generative
I see.
text to image models.
Yeah.
Like no one on DeviantArt said like, oh, for sure you can use. No one opted in.
Mhm.
People are able to slightly like opt out now. Like even ChatGPT is starting to give people the ability to opt out of being scraped from their like web crawler. You can put
Mhm.
something on your website that's in like the robots.txt file that says like, yeah, no, don't feed this into your globally trained text language model.
Sure.
Um, so now that's starting to happen a little bit with visual art as well with computer vision. It's like you as an artist can say like, please don't include me anymore
Yeah.
in your training process, even though they've already been scraped. And it's like it should be an opt-in thing. It should be the kind of thing where it's like you pay me to put my art in your model, like because I add value by creating this art in a unique and cool way. It's my
It just
signature.
feels like there's like a massive gash, but you're just applying like one band-aid on it because the companies that don't care about these ethics are not going to abide by your robots.txt file. It just seems silly to think that this is, the solution. But yeah, I just wanted to say that we should, if we have time, we should also talk about deep fakes because I think this all comes into this one big problem, which I don't think that people are realizing how big of a deal deep fakes are. But just as an example, with AI being able to talk like anyone, or imitate the speech styles of any particular person, with certain AIs being able to replicate your voice. I think this is a feature in Apple's next update, with AIs being able to create images of anything, like through natural language. There are going to be a lot of deep fake terrorism, of people saying, I'm going to release certain things about you, and since your name and face are in my database, I'm able to replicate you to perfection and make it look like exactly you are doing whatever. So send me a certain amount of money and, hope for the best. So I don't even know if there's a question. I just think that we should be talking about this problem. But how should we be thinking about this deep fake catastrophe that is brewing and that no one is really, this is not a mainstream conversation right now, and it should be.
Totally. Yeah, it goes both ways too. It's like I believe that sex work is real work, and like people who have been in the porn industry often want to separate themselves from it.
Hmm.
And it's harder and harder to do that now with the massive facial recognition data sets
Right.
because it's like, oh, I put my classmate's yearbook photo into a system, and now it's like, ooh, they're in some like really raunchy stuff, turns out.
Right.
And they really like that's their former life. They didn't want anyone to know about that. And like that's a violation of their privacy. And these systems like shouldn't exist, right? Like that shouldn't be available. And here we are. And then on the other side, it's like a new front of cyberbullying. And yeah, like you mentioned, almost like terrorism, or you could it could be used for extortion. Like so now we have to fight that. We have this cat and mouse game of like, how do we take down servers that are like hosting that kind of data? How do we take down services that are like letting people, enabling people to do that kind of thing? I spoke to people at Adobe, and they're famous for like Photoshop, Adobe Premiere, like video editing software, image editing software, and they have to grapple with these moral questions of like, what do we let people do? Because like in the lab, they can synthesize voice, right? Like you give them a 20-second sample of your voice, and they can have you read a whole long speech, like read a
Sure.
whole book in that style. And they're not going to release that because they don't want you, their customer, making deepfakes and like just like hate speech and slurs enabled by Adobe. Like that's bad for their branding, right? Like that's bad for them in a world where like they don't want to show up in the news as someone, as an entity that's like enabling this kind of thing. So I think it's in everyone's best interest to build tools that are more like screwdrivers and less like guns, right? Like
Mm.
you can design the tool to be constructive, and you can design the tool so that its design suggests like using it in a positive way. Um, and we should disincentivize people from using it in a way that harms people. It's going to
For
be out
sure.
there, right? Like there's always
Yeah.
someone making a Molotov cocktail somewhere, but we don't need to have them at the gas station, like ready to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. 100% agree. Last question for you. This is the Gen Z Diplomat podcast. So, what advice do you have for Gen Z?
Definitely touch grass. I think that's some good advice that I've gotten from Gen Z.
For sure.
And it turns out it's true. It makes me feel better. It makes me
Yeah.
feel more connected to nature, and it reminds me that it's not all about algorithms
Yeah.
and
For sure.
privacy. It's like the park is nice. Like let's just grill and chill. But definitely on a serious note, I think Gen Z, you're gonna get to that age if you're not already, where it's time to vote, and we should vote for people who have our best interests at heart. And that means being up to speed on these civic issues like protecting people's privacy in public spaces, um, trying to mitigate, massive data scraping and building these big facial recognition data sets for evil,
Yeah.
um, and reducing people's ability to make snake oil and like make big money on stuff that doesn't actually work. Like in medicine, these things should be thoroughly vetted. You shouldn't be able to just sell on the premise of like, oh, this is cool and it's computer vision, and you give it an image and it gives you a result, therefore pay me. It's like, no,
Mm.
it has to work just as well as like an expert trained radiologist, or else it's going to hurt people. So let's not put that out there. Yeah, so just on the whole, let's embrace technology. Let's embrace the changes because they're coming, whether we want them to or not. But let's try to make it positive and round off some of those sharp edges that can hurt us as we go.
Well, that was fantastically said, Rob. You are full of wisdom, and I can't wait to read your book. What is it called, and where can we find it? And also, where can we find you in cyberspace?
Great. Yes, my book is called The Spring of Sight: An Inflection Point for Computer Vision and Society. My name is Robert Boscacci, and you can find me on my website, robertboscacci.com. You can find more about the book at my website /book.
Yeah.
You can get the book on Amazon, on paperback or on ebook, on
Yeah.
Kobo, on Barnes and Noble as well. Has the book for sale. So any of the kind of major book retailer outlets.
Perfect. And all those links will be in the description. Rob, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun.